I hope everyone had a productive breakout session. We're going to go through each breakout session and report out so everyone can hear what was discussed within each breakout session. So if we want to start with Breakout Room 1, Joe, if you want to recap what we talked about and let the rest of the group know.
I'm just going to give you the heads up, Bree, that I am slowly kind of unmuting everybody. They all came in at once for the LCP and the DOTD members. So just letting you know as I go down the list. Should have everybody up though. Who is the first one you said?
Joe Keynes. There we go. Here, I'm unmuting him right now.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Joe, can you hear us? Joe
Keynes? I got you now. Here we go. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Yep. So I think we had a good discussion in our breakout. We touched on some various topics, more so centered around the mainline structure, some discussion of the actual structure height itself, and then the rest of it was generally related to aesthetics. Some of the questions and comments that came out of the discussion was long spans are a plus. It's a concept that's not typically found in Lafayette, but several of the members of the breakout group thought that was a positive thing. Also, the point was made that the adjacent and impacted community that this corridor is going to cross through, their involvement is very important, and we need to make sure that we consider that as we go through these workshops in this process. There was a lot of discussion around the SB girders. Obviously, it's kind of the more attractive bridge type. The comments were, the SB girders are more appealing because there are fewer girders for the bridge. Although it's a higher cost, there are other benefits that speak to more than just the function of the bridge itself. There was a question about noise barriers and how it affects sound projection. The question was really, how with these bridges coming through, how noisy is it? And if you have noise walls, how effective will those noise walls be? I think the answer at this point is we have not been able to perform the noise study. And once we do, which that noise study will be performed on the preferred alternative, we'll have a better understanding of how the noise barriers will perform if they are warranted. We also talked about in regards to longer spans, the fact that they can better support and promote underbridge uses. That's a topic that I think we're going to be discussing in future workshops. So I'll leave that to Steve and Tim to kind of address. Moving down to superstructure height, the question was, what effect does a 22-foot structure height have on the neighboring community versus a 30-foot structure height? And, there was also a sound question in there as well, which I just spoke about. So, we talked a little bit about just the different heights of bridge and the fact that we are considering both 22-foot height all the way up to a 30-foot height. In regards to aesthetics, we talked about just making sure that the aesthetic elements are coordinated within the corridor and with the community. Don't want to just stick the community with something just because of some preconceived notion. And that's part of the purpose of these workshops as well as to gather the input and make sure that we're on the right path when it comes to putting together concepts and displaying them and showing them to you guys. The point was made that other cities may have some good examples. Miami was one example that was brought up. They may have some good concepts that we can draw from in terms of retaining walls and the textures and styles and maybe even paintings that were on those walls. We discussed whether or not there would be under bridge lighting. We also discussed that, you know, because of the fact that there's so many different neighborhoods and everyone may have a different opinion, we discussed whether or not different textures and themes would be applied in different sections of the corridor. And I think that's a good discussion point. I think right now the point is to really just gather all of the input we can and kind of see where it falls out, and we would make that decision later on during this process. I think that pretty much wraps it up. Gary, did I miss anything?
That's a really good summary. I think you pretty much caught more than I can think about. No.
Let's
Okay,
move
thanks.
to the next one then. I think that's perfect. We have about 5 minutes for each of the breakouts to kind of report out. So we'll just go to the next one. If Mike McGaw, you want to report for breakout room 2.
Sure. Mainline structure, there was a clear consensus that the SP was the most aesthetically appealing. There was a question about cost, which Ken Butler can probably address better than maybe we did, but there was the question, why is the SP more expensive than the other two options? And we did note that for the other two options, they could be precast and brought, whereas you need to generally fabricate the SB on site if you can. So it's a little more expensive. It's post-tension. So, if we have time to circle back, Ken maybe can elaborate on that. We talked a little bit about the transportation. And of course, the little segments are smaller for SB, and so easier to maneuver than when you're moving the long LU or LG girders. Also had some questions about on the SB about water getting into the cavity, which it doesn't. And as far as the freezing of the deck, when you have that open cavity in the SBs, and we talked about that a little bit. Let's see, and there was it was noted that on the SBs there is less algae and mold because you have fewer exposed surfaces. So we moved on to piers, and Charles Bull asked an excellent question. He was asking about the drainage on the deck. And generally you have a scupper on the deck, then you pipe it down to the ground to discharge or tie into a system. And he was asking how that would be handled. Would it be unsightly? That's something, for our bridge folks to think about, to try to make that as unsightly, because it can be unsightly if it's not handled properly. Actually, they liked the first two options, which are the more traditional option, the pier shapes. They like those the best. Seemed to be some fondness for the one with the panel where you could put some art, and might even try to do something with what Tom Salmons mentioned, which is Art Deco inspiration for the panel. From there, we moved into superstructure height, and there was concern about a couple things. One of them, the vegetation. Does the height, will that have an impact on what type of vegetation can be used around and under the structure? That's more of a Jeff Grobe question, but it's a very good question. And then the other big concern about it was noise. How is that 30 feet height versus 22 going to impact the noise that's generated by the interstate? So there's a lot of concern about that. I think generally like the look of the hire, but want to take into consideration how that impacts noise. And it was also noted that lighting, could help underneath that. As far as the abutment, the clear loser there was the flagstone option, because it's not indigenous to South Louisiana. So they like more of the pattern and the imagery. Those were preferred there. And then there were just, at the end, we dealt with basically other issues, and it was noted that, the traffic projections for the interstate might be too high. Something was noted that with what's going on in the economy right now and so on, that maybe the projections were or too high. Also, one of our breakout members mentioned that he did not think the interstate was positive for the community. And then there was just noted that one evaluation criteria could be construction feasibility to expedite construction as much as possible. So make that a major consideration as well. So I think that's it.
Great, thank you. John McNamara, Breakout Room 3.
Breakout Room 3. First of all, as we talked about the three structural system types, one of the major questions that we started with was, are they all basically the same structural integrity, long-term long-term maintenance? Are they all basically designed to meet the same long-term criteria in terms of structural, aesthetics, maintenance, and so forth? And of course, the answer was yes. They're all the same from that perspective, but they vary in terms of things like aesthetics and costs and so forth. But yes, there is no difference among the three types in terms of their long-term structural integrity and deterioration and all that kind of stuff. It's not generally any difference between those. I would say overall, and we didn't ask for preference or voting or anything like that, but overall there was a lot of interest in the segmental box girder situation, lots of attention there. And the attention there focused on the fact that they do well in terms of emitting a lot of light under the structure, obviously less footprint, a more slimmer look from the aesthetics on the side. And in fact, even more slimmer to the point where they may actually give you the impression they're higher than they actually are because of those slim aesthetics. And the possibility, without knowing what the joint uses are that we might be looking at down the road, other than I kind of gave an overview of a number of ideas that have been thrown out, they might be more flexible for joint use activities under as well. We had a lot of discussion about construction impacts of the various types. Fortunately, I had a lot of people on my committee from the neighborhoods right along the corridor. And so they were very concerned about the idea of, is one structural system less impactful to build versus the other? And we had a little discussion of the phasing of the various efforts in construction, the foundation, the piers, laying the girders in place, or the segmental boxes and so forth. And so Joe got us through all of that, and they had a better idea there. And again, the segmental box probably had the least impact from that perspective as well. We had quite a bit of interest in the integration of artwork and cultural references on the piers, on the walls and so forth, but particularly on the piers. And like Mike's group, I think it was the second from the left pier that actually had a panel of artwork integrated, seemed to attract quite a bit of attention there. But generally the idea of integrating artwork throughout the project, whether it's on abutment walls, retaining walls, or piers, or even on the barriers, is of strong interest. And then speaking of barriers and abutments, again, a great place for the integration of aesthetic treatments like textures and so forth, and artwork. But then what's the long-term maintenance requirements of those kinds of things? And as Gary pointed out on Tuesday night, interestingly enough, sometimes artwork can be designed and textures can be designed such that they actually change over time as they accumulate dirt, and can be aesthetic, a different aesthetic than they were when they started out. And then of course, when they eventually get power washed, they go back to where they started. And so that's a challenge. And that brought up the idea that the more we can show of those examples and so forth, the better. And I expressed that we also do intend to be talking about public art and art integration further as we move forward. And we're in the very early stages of talking with the MPO, particularly about how to convene a small group of specialists in that area to help us with that we would then bring back to the LCAG and to the public at large. I think lastly, we ended with a request from one of our neighborhood representatives that it would really be good to bring back a few case studies from obviously what would probably can be considered to be successful cases on decisions on girder types and community input into those girder types, as well as height, clear height underneath in terms of whether 22 or 30 is adequate and so forth. And along the lines of height, I left out one thing, and that is one of our questions was, is a 30-foot situation an all or nothing kind of situation? Could we have 30 feet of height in a certain area where it might be more appropriate and might be more impactful and might make more of a statement, and not necessarily have to have 30 feet on the entire viaduct? And so there was some interest there in that, and we had a discussion about that. Has to do then, we have to think about things like ramping and so forth when we're doing those kinds of things. And lastly, noise. We did have a discussion of noise and some of the ways to abate noise, and whether the 22 or 30 has an impact on noise. I explained that noise studies are going to be done, as Joe pointed out, a little bit later in the process, and we will be looking at a whole variety of techniques relative to noise abatement.
Perfect. Thanks, John.
Group 3.
All right, group 4, Jeff Grobe.
Group 4. All right. We had a lively discussion on structure height. I think that it was clear that higher is better because it's perceived to be more open, more approachable, and safer. And so higher is better, but at the flip side of that is it at what trade-off to cost for something else? So we talked about, if the money was spent to make it higher, would that then not have monies available to do other things? And I said, well, that's to be determined. But it was generally felt, just from a pure aesthetic perspective, that higher was better, at least under and immediately adjacent to the structure. Was also pretty much consensus was that less girders is better, because you have more open space underneath. You have cleaner lines. You would probably, if you went for the SB system, you'd not have the pier cap, so that would greatly increase the visual space available underneath the structure, so that less girders was deemed probably a little bit more, it would add to the airiness of the places underneath. We talked a bunch about the noise of the structure, not the noise impact of the neighborhoods, but are any of the structures louder or quieter by virtue of themselves? And we talked about that, and it's really basically all concrete structures are about the same sound generators, and that was compared to steel. So if you're going to look at steel versus concrete, concrete's quieter. All three concrete structure types were deemed to be more or less about the same as far as generation of sound. Again, the big question here was, we're talking about maybe doing this higher or better, but what is it in terms of total project cost trade-off? That was a big discussion, because if you had to pick something that was more, community-based, or is there money could go elsewhere, and whose money is it? That would definitely impact what kind of structure might be okay, and how that was developed. So that was a pretty good discussion. We talked about shorter construction duration is clearly preferable for the community impact and particularly impact to any adjacent businesses. We felt that if you could shorten the construction duration at all, that would be most appealing, particularly for quality of life and what does it do to adjacent business owners. No one was a real fan of the round columns. I think that, like the other folks said, probably column types 1 and 2 scored a little higher just in terms of visual appeal than 3 and 4. Although somebody said that the column has to work with the rest of the bridge so that the whole thing makes sense as a whole thing. And Bradley had said that on Tuesday, that this is not, Mr. Potato Head structure design. It really has to work holistically. And that was confirmed here is that what types of columns, what kinds of texture treatments, it all has to work as a system. We too said that there's not a lot of rock in South Louisiana, so natural is fine, but there's not a lot of masonry in the area. And somebody also said that the plaques that were noticed there on column type 2 were a nice thing to do, and that would probably be seen as a community asset, having that ability to have some designation or some art that references local themes would be appreciated on the columns or on the abutments and such. But higher is better, less girder is better, shorter construction is better, but where the trade-off for total project funds, big deal. Back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Gary, room number 5. Gary Heitman.
Number 5, I would say we kind of echoed a lot of what Jeff just said. Higher is better to have more visual openness and allows more connectivity underneath and through the structure. So there was a lot of good feedback we got there. Our group seemed to favor the segmental boxes just because, again, it just allowed a better visual observation than did the other options. The LGs, there was some concern about just the number of lines and just the number of the faces that was discussed on Tuesday as well. The many faces on those understructure types. But I think there was a lot of discussion too about possibly the height and even the columns themselves are more important than the actual structure type, being that if you push it up higher and if you have some nice column features that draw the attention, to your eye plane rather than looking up, it might be a little more desirable. So there was some good discussion about that. Regarding the piers, I think we too thought options 1 and 2 had a lot of merit. 2 being that more Art Deco, you could kind of blend it into some themes in the neighborhoods or different things like that. Whereas 1, there was a comment made that it looked a lot, possibly even the shape of it, and it just seemed cleaner and less, less intrusive, I guess, was the comment. But I don't think we had anybody who said that they really liked the options 3 or 4, the ones with the bigger masses of columns. So we kind of lumped our discussion of retaining walls and the abutments. Similar to what Jeff or John said, one of them said that there was a lot of concern about just the maintenance aspects. There was a mention of the texture is nice, but if it creates some long-term maintenance concerns, then may not want to go there. There was some mention that some of the panels and different textures you can put on panels could also kind of help tie and integrate the neighborhood and community themes into the corridor as well. So that was pretty appealing. There wasn't a whole lot of input on the different back of barrier options, other than, again, with the maintenance concern. Didn't really like the painted options, with that little linear paint stripe down it. Just thought that would be kind of a maintenance long-term nightmare. And also, just concerns about dirt and growth and all that kind of stuff contributing to some of those textures. So cautioned us to kind of be careful when we look at different options there. And also in regards to the retaining walls and all, there was a concern about just the cost of them. If some are just astronomically more expensive than others, probably don't want to move those type of things forward, be more realistic with what is shown, and progress in the future discussions. But in general, I think the panel type walls are those that had the ability to put some, maybe some palmettos or some type of community type integration really had a lot of appeal. And then we spent a little bit of time there at the end talking about MOT, and really the concern there, obviously traffic is a concern, but there is also, as we know, a lot of cross connectivity with bike and peds. And so that we talked about really needing to focus when we develop a good concept for maintenance of traffic, consider bike and peds and how they were going to be moving across and through the corridor. And in particularly, the major crossings, Willow, Jefferson and West 2nd, those type of streets, really, we need to pay particular attention to because they are heavily trafficked by the bike and ped community. I think that kind of sums up where we were.
Great. Jonathan McDowell, Breakout Room 6.
Yes, Breakout Room 6. I think within our group, we all kind of push towards had a lean towards the segmental box as the smoothest, continuous, as the cleanest looking of the mainline structure types, the girder types. But all of them were monumental in some way, and in order to really kind of break down that grandness or the scale of the viaduct, other treatments would really be needed to provide that specialness or put that community stamp on the project. And we had the same discussion about the 3 different structure types relative to noise, and how each of them would probably perform about the same, being that they're all concrete structures. The segmental box was a more opportunity for underneath programming, kind of felt, because they had to be able to get that more light in. It talked about also both on the structure type and the piers columns doing, is there opportunity to do a variety of them, kind of mix and match going through the corridor? Have, with the viaduct being so long, maybe there's opportunities for segments to be different pier types or different girder types. And let's see, talked a little bit about the option 2 and 3 of the piers being preferable, but still, opportunity to just kind of mix it up, add the cultural enhancement opportunities, particularly at the major street crossings. Within the urban core, like the 30-foot high with the segmental girders, particularly in Macomb, Vizay, Freetown, Puerto Rico neighborhoods, keeping a consistent height, much free and open space as we can let in, but at the same time having that safety component on their structure. But we also talked about, with it being 30 feet high, that kind of adds to the scale of the structure, and it may be visible from from the each side of the highway from a further distance, and so where's that balance between the 30 foot and the 22 foot, and is there a middle ground there? That's a it's a best win for both, going both ways with it. So there was a concern about the bridge may dwarf the adjacent structures to it. Talked about lighting under the bridge as an opportunity to provide the safety component in lieu of the 30 foot, the higher structure. Talked about wanting to see the view of the structure, particularly in the historic districts. The views that were shown were just at one specific ground level, and how does that look within each of the communities? And let's see what else. Talked a lot about the abutments. Talked about particularly at University, the walls, the retaining walls. Since it's right there near the airport, that's a gateway opportunity. As people are coming in the Lafayette from the airport, the first thing they see when they come out of the airport is the University interchange, and also not only having that conversation with the airport, but also with the University in order to make sure that we speak to both sides of the road, so to speak. But like the opportunity to be able to add lots of different art and cultural imprint into the community, and how that those items can help kind of break down the mass of the structure. Let's see. And lastly, just great opportunity to bring the community in the process, and also mention that also about that there was some concern about the traffic on Johnson Street with the railroad when the railroad passes and blocks the traffic there. There was maybe no comment. That was just on some other topics that we talked about through here. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan.
Hey, Bree, this is Gary. One other thing I forgot to mention was that one of our group members said it would be nice if we could point to some similar structure types and heights in the Lafayette area that they could go, drive under, look at, and just really get a better a feel for what they would be looking at. I know I mentioned the Louisiana Interchange as being one of the newer ones in the area. I think it's got a long span. I couldn't remember if it was either used or the boxes, but there may be some other similar examples in the area with, some higher than typical clearance and some of these structure types we're looking at. So I don't know if Steve or Gary Magi have any input on that or not.
Hey, Gary, this is Steve Wallace. I'm not sure right offhand, but we could certainly do some research and report back and give some different spots that folks could go look at that would be similar both in the type of bridges that we were talking about, the girder type, as well as let them know what heights they would be passing under to get a feel for that. So that's something I think we could provide as we move along for sure.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're just gonna wrap up. Gary, Steve, if you wanna maybe talk about next steps, what we're gonna be doing with this input, what the next meetings look like, then we can.
Sure. Maybe
Sure.
I'll talk about structures and let Steve give the big picture. But thank you, everybody. It's really been enjoyable to hear this feedback from everybody, and also want you to know what will happen is Bradley and I and the whole LCP team will be taking this as we continue our development of the design. We are not done, right? We have a lot more input to get. We want to make sure it's right. And as we move into the next workshops, I think Tim mentioned in the beginning that we would definitely want to have a kind of a regrouping of a design workshop one feedback that we may have missed, right? So about 4 or 5 weeks from now, we're going to get together again on a Tuesday, and we're going to do like we did last Tuesday, basically have a presentation on, and this time it's going to be on signature bridges and conventional bridges with signature elements and gateway features. Yeah, so what does that mean, right? That's the big bridge, right? And it also means what other items, and I guess I'll let Bradley maybe introduce a little bit of that before we go over to Steve. Bradley, you want to chime in?
It's going to be fun. No, there's a lot of good ideas that are coming together, and certainly all the information that we've heard over the past few days is going to feed into that as well. So we want to make sure that this is an iterative process, that we're building on all of the work that we've done, so that hopefully when we come back to you, you'll see a bit more refined versions of what you've already seen, as well as the next level of refinement and enhancement.
Alrighty, Steve, do you want to close it out?
Sure. Well, again, thank you all for coming, and thanks for the good feedback. I was kind of able to hop between group to group, and everybody was chiming in and giving some very good opinions and feedback, et cetera. So all of that input is very necessary, very, very critical to, as Bradley was talking about, as we kind of mix up a big bowl of gumbo here and try to decipher really what the bridges and the project should look like. And we heard you in terms of the amount of time that you need between the first meeting of a workshop and the second one. So as we move forward to workshop number 2, we'll give about a week between the first meeting that we'll have on a Tuesday, and then probably a Tuesday a week from then, have the second meeting where hopefully during that week between, you're able to get back with your neighborhood group or your constituent group and be able to show them what you learned at that first meeting, and then come back at the second one and give some input on what you heard and questions and that kind of thing. But another point that was made is input on all of this can be ongoing. And as you think about things, I think maybe Brett and others were like, hey, I turned in a form, but I got new thoughts now. Can you trash that one and I'll send you another one? Certainly. And because it's a lot of information, a lot of things to soak in. So keep giving us input as we go along. So again, Gary mentioned specific input on workshop 1. We'll have a time during workshop 2 where we're focused on that and try to ask you specifically, were there other things that you got during the time frame between now and then. Looking forward to workshops 3, 4, 5, and 6. Workshop 3, we'll be talking about Evangeline Corridor and some of the options along Evangeline, whether it's a one-way couplet like you have today, or is it moved over to be a Grand Boulevard? And then in conjunction with that, we'll be talking about the different ramp placements of how you come into town from I-10 to be able to get downtown, and to show you some of the differences there. So bike and pedestrians are things that we want to dive into deeper later, even after that. So there'll be a lot of discussion on that. So all that to say, a lot of things to go through. And we will have some neighborhood meetings that'll start after the second workshop. And we'll be meeting with all the neighborhoods along the corridor to get their input, going over the same material that you guys are seeing. And so public meetings will be part of the whole mix as well, where anybody in the public will be able to come in and give input too. So thank y'all again. We're 5 minutes out from 6 o'clock, Bree, and I don't know if there's anything else we need to go over, but from my perspective, thank y'all very much. And we're trying to get better as we move forward through the whole virtual world and COVID, and how to do this kind of thing the best. And so continue to give us that feedback too. So,
And we will be
you'll
asking in a survey again. We want to continue, like Steve said, to get feedback. So we'll send another short survey, make sure that we hear you. And if you have a feedback form you want to submit, you can send it to me at bhodges@bbrcreative.com, and I'll collect them and make sure they get circulated to the team. And again, the recording of this meeting and the breakout rooms will be on the website probably tomorrow morning. So you can share those with your constituents and neighbors, and they can follow along this project with us. So thank you again.
Yeah. Well, Tim, did you have anything you wanted to close out with?
Not really. I just encourage everyone that, we go through a lot during this meeting to email comments or anything you find. I think we have a email address they can submit comments to for the project. And we just thank you for your participation and your time.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yeah. Good
Thanks,
evening.
everybody.